Hello, folks. I've just done a show with Nicola about the Brenner Pass, but I thought I would do a book review show before I go into the weekend. And one of the requests I've had several times is for what my recommendations about studying the Holocaust are, because it's a massive subject, and people are, I think, are a bit intimidated by the vastness of the subject, by the how harrowing it is, etc., etc. So I thought I'd give some advice on the books I like. And again, there are hundreds, thousands of books about the Holocaust. So these are my personal recommendations, books I've read. There'll be plenty of other books I haven't read that I'm sure are also fantastic. But we'll start with two books about the early part of the Holocaust era, because I think we have a lot of knowledge about the death camps, the gas chambers and aspects like that, the Holocaust. We forget kind of the early part of it. We forget the Operation Barbarossa, the Holocaust by bullets. So I mentioned this first book in another show about the Eastern Front, but it's coming up again. So Waitman Bjorn, who's a friend and a guest on the channel, he wrote this book, The Holocaust in Eastern Europe. Waitman Wade Bjorn, who's a American former military, he was in tanks, who now teaches in the UK, and his book is about the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. So it is about that beginning stage of the Germans dealing with things on a large scale. So it starts with bullets, it starts with other methods, mass killings, and then it's that era there that accounted for possibly as many as like 2.5–3 million of the Holocaust victims were in the early stage before that even kind of finished a death camp as we think of them. So Waitman Bjorn's book is the first one I would thoroughly recommend. The second book in that kind of early era in that it sets up what the German aim was, that sinister aspect of how they're going to be dealing with it, is this book on the Wannsee Conference and the Final Solution by Mark Roseman. It's a fairly small book. It talks about the Wannsee Conference, or Wannsee, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is when Heydrich is putting the system to the other people within the Third Reich. So the people who are in charge of the trains and the industry and the labor and the economic policies, etc., 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 all that took part in that manor house in Germany. And so Mark Roseman takes you through the process. What were they trying to do? What happened at the meeting, and how did that influence the untold misery that followed it, with the creation of, or ramping up, I should say, of the killing of Jews and other people. And I would always remind people, I should have said at the very beginning of the show, the Holocaust is all encompassing. We tend to focus on the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, but in total it was 11 million. So if you're looking at studying the Holocaust, you've got to remember that it isn't just Jewish people. They, of course, are the vast majority, but there's also the gypsies and the homosexuals and the intellectuals and the poets and the other undesirables, mentally handicapped, disabled. The list goes on and on. And of course, had the Nazis got through with the first step of this, if they had not been defeated, who knows how many more groups of people they'd have persecuted next. It doesn't even bear thinking about. So there we are. So that they're my first two books. Next question is, how do you introduce the Holocaust to younger people? Because it's horrible. It's the death, the suffering is awful. And a book that I think is fantastic, it has had some criticism more recently, is Maus. So Maus, if you don't know it, is a graphic novel by Art Spiegelman. This is the complete volume, because there was 2 or 3 different versions of the book, and it's about the Holocaust from the point of view of a guy, a younger person, asking his grandfather how he went through the war. But it's a graphic novel, so all the victims are mice. So Maus is and the various other people involved in the Holocaust. There are cats, there are dogs, and it takes you through the story of one family and their experience through this art form of the graphic novel. I think it's a fantastic book. I think if you're a young adult, I mean, you wouldn't give it to like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, but if someone is 11 or 12 and maybe a bit younger, depending on how good they are, how knowledgeable they are, with the world is a horrible place today. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. If you want to explain to people about how hatred begins, how persecution gets hold, then Mouse is a really good way of informing younger people. So there we are. That's a one for kids, or not so much kids, but younger people. You can't talk about the Holocaust without talking about Anne Frank. Now, there are loads of versions of the Anne Frank story on film. There's TV. There's a TV series. There's one with Ben Kingsley as Anne's father. There's the 1950s version with Shelley Winters in it, etc., etc., etc. The Anne Frank diary. There are all sorts of versions of it available online. Because various parts of it kind of ended up not quite in the public domain, but it's being printed by people without the backing of the Anne Frank Foundation and the Anne Frank Institution that works out of Amsterdam. So the version I recommend, and it's a big one, is this. This is the thing. There's the thickness of it. Is the Anne Frank, the collected works. Okay, now it will cost you a bit of money because it's a bit, obviously, a big book. But what you have in here is you have both versions of Anne Frank's diary, because, and I'm not going to do the full story there, the long version, she talks about her period. She talks about the fact she was attracted to girls, other girls. She talks about sexual feelings. She's very, at times, negative about her mother, the family relationship. And then there was another version that the family kind of approved, where they took out the mention of, periods and menstruation and possible kind of bisexuality, and produced a more kind of user-friendly version. This book has both versions in there. It has essays about the importance of the book. It has essays and articles by people who knew the Frank family. It has historiography, a chapter about how the story has been told differently. And it's basically, as it says on the title there, it is the collected works. You have Anne Frank's letters she wrote as well to other people included in there. So it's kind of if you want to understand the Holocaust from the point of view of Anne Frank, which is so many people's entry point to the Holocaust, although it, the diary, the films, that they invariably stop with them being discovered by the Nazis and taken away, and the various members of the Frank family died in different places, and I think there's still some debate about exactly when Anne and her sister died. That they died of disease, I think, in the end, rather than being gassed. The mother had died. Anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole with that, but I definitely recommend the full Anne Frank, the collected works. If you don't want to get the big version, then just check that, because there's like 20, 30, 40 different versions on Amazon and other booksellers. Make sure, my advice is to get the full version where Anne Frank is expressing, as I say, ideas about her sexuality, because you get a complete picture of a young girl going through that aspect of her life, in addition to hiding for her life along with her family from the Nazis. So I would recommend the full version of the diary, not the slightly shorter abridged version. So that's the Anne Frank book. Get that done. I wasn't sure whether to include this next book in a Holocaust show or not, because it's not really about the Holocaust, but it kind of is. And the next book is Hunting Evil by Guy Walters. So this is about the post-war, or end of the war and post-war hunt for the Nazi perpetrators. So yeah, those who went to South America, Hitler didn't, by the way, but others did. So Eichmann and Mengele. It talks about the trials. It talks about that aspect. And so, although it's not about the Holocaust, it is about how the Allies did at least try to bring to justice those that had been responsible for this, arguably one of the most outrageous mass crimes in human history. And as people say, like Waitman Bjorn, when he comes on, the sad reality is only a tiny percentage of those who perpetrated the crimes of the Holocaust ever brought to justice. Now, some simply died during World War II in the final battles within Germany, but many others just were never persecuted. And there's a whole subject for discussion about the fact that some of these known criminals ended up working for the Soviets, or they worked indeed for the Allies, or they were allowed to disappear, they were allowed to change names, etc., etc., etc. So Hunting Evil is not about the Holocaust, but it's about that attempt by the Allies to bring to justice. And there's some amazing stories in there. One of my takeaways from Guy Walters' book is is Mengele, when he was living in South America, was just openly in the telephone book. The idea that all these guys are sort of hiding in the middle of the jungle is not always the case. They were living, hiding in plain sight. So that's about the persecution or the attempt to bring to justice the Holocaust perpetrators. Then we're going to move on to kind of personal stories about the Holocaust, and one of the movies that made a big impact on me was Escape from Sobibor, that came out in 1988, I believe. So I was 19. Alan Arkin is in it, Rutger Hauer was in it, Joanna Pakula was in it, and it was a British two-part TV show that then was made into a film. There's been a more modern version of Escape from Sobibor made with Christophe Lambert a couple of years ago. Anyway, Escape from Sobibor was a film I saw when I was 18, 19 years old. So I wanted to find out more about the real story. And Sobibor was the only sort of death camp where there was actually an organized revolt / escape by prisoners. We did a show about it on the channel. I'll try and remember to put the link in there later on. So I wanted to find out more about this. So of the people who broke out of the of Sobibor, which was a death camp in Poland, about 140 or something, and it was mostly they weren't the ones who escaped were the ones who were workers. They were the people that were kept on at the death camp to sort through the belongings and meet the trains at the station, etc., etc. Was Thomas Toivy Blatt, and he was 15 or 16 at the time of the escape, and he wrote two books. He survived about Sobibor. So the first one is The Forgotten Revolt, which I bought on the internet a number of years ago. And what I particularly liked about the two books, because the other one is by Thomas Toivy Blatt, is hold it up properly, Ashes of Sobibor, A Story of Survivals. This one is Blatt's own account of his own war. So where he was at the beginning, how he went through the war, how he survived, and eventually moved to the US. And he died about 3 years ago, Thomas Blatt. And I corresponded with email a couple of times, which was amazing. But if you want to get one of those books, I think this one is the easier one to get, from The Ashes of Sobibor by Thomas Toivy Blatt. But the one I would recommend getting is the one I held up a minute ago. So Sobibor, the Forgotten Revolt, and the bit that in it is really amazing, and perhaps amazing is an inappropriate word, is that Blatt got to interview one of the commanders at Sobibor like 40 years after war, and the transcript of the conversation they met at a hotel in somewhere neutral. I forget where it was now from memory, but in here, I'll put my glasses on for a second, there's a transcript of the whole experience there. He's also he met with one of the Russians who was involved in it there, and that aspect is particularly fascinating, because you hear about what happened to the perpetrators in the camp, as well as the escapers. So two books by Thomas Toivy Blatt, Sobibor, The Forgotten Revolt, and the other one was From the Ashes of Sobibor. Actually, I'll tell you, I think actually I've got maybe I've got that wrong. Maybe the transcript is in both books. No, I think it is in The Forgotten Revolt. So both worth getting. Next, one of my issues with reading about the Holocaust, and you're going to think, well, obviously, Paul, is that it's unrelentingly harrowing and unrelentingly awful. And some of the books are just, well, they just depress you. I mean, obviously they're going to depress you. It was tragic, but the thing is, if you're going to get something from it, you've got to finish the book. You've got to persevere. So I try to find a couple of books where there are happier endings. So the one I'm recommending, which I've started rereading last night, is The Cutout Girl by Bart van Es, and it's about a Dutch girl who was Jewish, whose parents, and the Cutout Girl is to do with the fact that she had a little scrapbook with little cut out bits of paper inside it that she kept from the war, and the girl survived, by the way. So it's a story of survival. So it goes through the dark, goes through the innocence of being, I think she was 7 or 8 when the war was declared, and it goes through to her being older, and I think she's still alive. She was certainly still alive when I got this book a couple of years ago. So it takes you from the point of view of a young Dutch girl who is at the beginning is too young to really understand what's going on. She's too young to understand that there's a moment when her mum just hands her over to a stranger, having taken off the yellow star from her dress, and gives her a note to give to this new parent, this brave non-Jew who's going to raise this child and pretend she's hers to allow her to survive. And I don't want to give the ending away, but what I appreciated out it is there's a happy ending. The girl lived, she survived the war, and it's not just the story of the war. It's about the author and Bart, who's a Dutch guy living in the UK. I think he was involved in something else, geography he taught, or journalism or something. He wasn't a World War II expert, but he found out about this Dutch girl that survived, and he went through the process of tracing her story. So he went to the place in Den Haag, in The Hague, where the girl was from, Lieb, her name is, and he retraced her steps to what happened to her through the war. So the Cutout Girl, it's again a brief read. I really suggest that one is a good one. And another one with an uplifting aspect, although obviously with a lot of negativity as well, is Born Survivors by Wendy Holden. And at some point Wendy is going to come on the channel. She had various prior commitments she couldn't do. We had it scheduled, but we'll do it at some point next year, I hope. So Born Survivors is about 3 babies who were born during the war in concentration camps to inmates, to people who've been, taken by the Germans, and how they actually survived. And so it's about their parents, it's about the persecution, it's about the process of finding out, Wendy Holden's process of finding out about these people. It has this resolution of the fact that these children born in such unimaginable, terrible conditions survived, and she ended up, Wendy Holden, meeting these 3 babies when they became obviously elderly, and so that's another one that has harrowing moments in it, but has a positive bit at the end, because this is the point I'm trying to get across to you. There's no point beginning to study the Holocaust and being put off because it's just so depressing. I've had that people say to me, I can't read about the Holocaust, it's too depressing. And I get that. I completely get. Primo Levi's book is also another one. I've only got the French version because it's a book Mag has. He's an Italian survivor of there. So yeah, you have to have, as Gerard says, you have to have a strong mindset to go through the Holocaust books. And I think if you're going to look at it, you to just read about unrelenting misery, there's only so many times you can read about that horror without it not every time it's still shocking. But that's why I'm trying to give you a suggestion for some books that have a variety of ways of looking at it, if that makes sense. The next one is trying to we talked about Guy Walter's book Hunting Hitler, about the search for the perpetrators, is the book by Nicholas Frank, and he's a regular guest on We Have Ways, whose father, and Nicholas Frank is a very well-known barrister in the UK, very famous and well-traveled, but his father was one of the nastiest guys in the SS. And this book, The Father, A Revenge, is about Nicholas's growing up to understand what his father did, try and comprehend how his father got involved in this, and the hatred he has for his father, along with the fact that he is born of this guy. It's a brilliant read, if that isn't a strange word to describe it, because obviously, again, there are moments that are deeply upsetting, as Nicholas is explaining, when he really, as a young man and as he got older, understood just the full degree to which his father was part of this mechanism. Because I think we collectively think of the Holocaust at the coal face, by which I mean the guards in the towers at the camps, the guys who are actually herding people off trains to the gas chambers, the people in Barbarossa actually putting a pistol to the back of the head of people and shoot them into trenches. But behind it was this sinister organization. Philip Blood has talked about it. It's the bureaucrats, the middle management, the supervisory aspect. So people who are just in charge of the trains, or in charge of, you know, getting ovens ordered, getting the paraphernalia together. And Frank's father was basically part of that mechanism, rather than actually going out and, you know, he wasn't like the commandant that Schindler got to know. What was his name? I forgot, not Hoss. You'll remind me in this, but he's not one of those. He's just part of this management aspect, and realizing that he is nevertheless absolutely as guilty as those who are at the front, at the coalface, putting a pistol to someone's head. He's part of the mechanism. So Nicholas Frank, the father, a revenge, a son's judgment on his Nazi war criminal father. And it's worth reading, because I think we could all imagine that people in our history, in our family histories, may not have all been fantastic people. Americans are dealing with the fact that their ancestors were slave owners. The same in the UK. People in your family going back a few generations may have been racist. They may have been nasty people. They may have been criminals. And I think we can all identify with the aspect that we are not guilty for the crimes of our fathers, of our grandfathers, of our predecessors, but we must acknowledge that these people did what they did, and trying to understand it and learn from it. That's the thing. That's why I'm recommending Nicholas Frank's book, is that there's a message to be learned through reading his experience of understanding the line between revenge, hatred, understanding, and it's complicated. It's a gray area of understanding. Amon Goff, that's it. Thank you, JD. So Nicholas Frank, the father, a revenge, and finally, like with Arnhem earlier, when I recommended Martin Middlebrook's book, if you want to read, and want is not the rate with the right, if you must read a single book about the Holocaust, then my recommendation is Final Solution by the late David Cesarani. The Fate of the Jews, 1933 to 1949. It's a big old read. And it takes you right the way through how the Weimar Republic morphs into the Nazi Party. It talks about how the Nazis gradually changed the laws, how the justice system worked, and the gradual cranking up. There's those ridiculous memes that go around of, you know, why didn't the Jews rise up when they were being persecuted? It wasn't like one day they were free to move around and the next day suddenly they're being arrested. It was a gradual closing in of this awful net around people, where, you know, you had to go and register this, you had to go and register your radios, and the people from jobs in schools were moved to other areas. And so it takes you through step by step, 33, 34, 35, just all the horrible, we now realize, steps in the process. And then as you get to the latter part of the book, it goes right into the frog in the pot metaphor, David K. Exactly. So many of the early stages, the Jews were inadvertently, and other victims of the Holocaust, sort of signing their own eventual death warrants by willingly going and registering and doing the things that were requested of them. You know, I'm not going to make any parallels to the ridiculous comparisons with COVID vaccinations, but you had to kind of get yourself listed in places. You had to declare certain things, and it goes into the examination of how the Nazis decided on what is Jewish and what are the classifications, who are the people they want to persecute. So it's a book that it's quite heavy going at the beginning, because it's lots about changes of the law, and you're not really seeing the results of the Holocaust yet, but you have to get through that. Probably the first third of the book is foundational. And then when you get to the cranking up of it, and you get to when people like Himmler and Heydrich and all these other absolute arseholes start getting involved in it, you understand how they've managed to, it's like a, what's that expression, switch bait and switch thing, where the German system, even the legal people, have fallen for this Nazi plan, and people are trying to kind of get out of this, that they're on a course now, that they're on tracks to this horrible persecution, and people caught up in it. The same kind of middle management people I talked about a minute ago, some of these, a few of them, a handful, were kind of almost victims themselves. They didn't realize where the mechanism would go. They didn't realize how these law changes were gradual, making a system, allowing the system to creep in for the Nazis to do what they did next. So that would be my single only book about the Holocaust that will, you'll come away understanding just how thorough in some ways the process was, but also paradoxically quite haphazard. The Nazis didn't initially think about murdering. There was initial ideas, and this is again this aspect is they were encouraging Jews to leave, just basically piss off out of Germany, and they just were get rid of, out of sight, out of mind. Then later on, it turned into if we can't make them leave, we should just start to kill them. So, Final Solution by David Cesarani is my final recommendation. I've talked for a bit longer than I thought I was going to. I thought it was going to be about 15 minutes. So that's it. That's my recommendations for the Holocaust. And my final bit of advice would be, again, if it's a subject that you're kind of fearful of getting into and starting, and I completely get that, kind of go through the pain barrier is my advice, because there's no good thing to come out of the Holocaust. But if there is a good thing to come out of reading about the Holocaust, it's the understanding of why the hell are we as human beings not more tolerant to other people who have different ideas to us, and where these ideas of hatred come from, and these ideas of putting blame on other people's. That is, understanding the Holocaust helps us understand how in some ways we are not much better in 2023 than we were as human beings 8 decades ago. We still are being forced to put our blame on easy targets. If something's going wrong, it's this group of people over there, those people. I'm going off on a tangent, but one of the easiest feelings to instill in human beings is hatred. It's easier than installing pride. It's easier than installing. If you can convince a group of people that all their woes are because of another group of people, that's easy to instill in people. It's that, even in a sporting environment, we've got to beat that team because that team are awful. They're not like us. So understanding the Holocaust is key, I think, to understanding how, as a species, we're going to try and move forward. And I'm not going to start getting into a rant about religion I'm just a rant about the worst of what human excesses can do. And again, I will say it again, I want to be considered woke. I want to be tolerant. I have views about things, but I'm not going to try and tell anybody else their views about things are wrong, unless they start telling me that I must follow their rules and I'm bad because of their opinions. And we all should live in the same place and be tolerant of each other's different ways of doing things. So there we are. I'm going to leave it at that. Understand the Holocaust is understanding human beings and our weaknesses, our failures in many ways, and we must all constantly try and move towards being loving and gracious and kind and tolerant and open. And the Holocaust was just a few generations ago, and you could say that Germany in the 1920s and 30s was just like many other countries in the world today. It was kind of moving forward. It thought it was progressive. It had unions. It had people from different cultures there, and then suddenly, progressively, but over a relatively short period of time, within a decade, it turned into this monstrous regime for an ideology that a false ideology. So there we are. It's a very personal show. This I'm not Jewish. I have no family members from any aspect that were ever caught up in the Holocaust. None of my family members who served in the military never went anywhere near liberating concentration camps. The closest I had as a kid, the barber who cut my hair, well, I had hair, was a survivor of, I don't know what, but he was a survivor of persecution. He was in a camp. I remember once his name was Izzy, and he was Jewish, and he was somewhere in Eastern Europe, and he ended up getting a home in the UK, and he cut my hair. But I'm going to end it at that. The Holocaust, you got to read about it, and hopefully some of the suggestions today have been good pointers to where to start with this mammoth, horrendous subject. But it needs us to read about it, to understand it, and to speak out against those who deny it. It's no good just tutting when you know someone who's talking about it and saying it didn't happen. Is speak out, tell them, give them the books to read. Right, I'm gonna stop now. Right, I'll see you. I'm gonna see you after the weekend. Have a good weekend, everybody. Don't have nightmares. But yeah, the Holocaust, what a shitty thing. Well, have a good weekend. Thanks for this. Bye.